Hello, everybody. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. So excited to welcome you to this really important discussion tonight. We'll be talking to Ann-Louise Lockhart. She'll be talking about anxiety, worry, and fear in young children. And there's so much that can be gleaned by the way of education for those of us with middle schoolers and high schoolers and even beyond. So I'm so glad that you have shared this gift of your time with us. Our ask back to you is to please share the resource of GPS. We have 50 programs a year at noon and at 7 p.m. in 4 different languages, covering truly the almost the whole lifespan, the early child, the young adult, ourselves. It's all here. So thank you for following us on social media and telling neighbors across the street or family around the country about the resource. Thank you. Thank you to the sponsors who make it possible. One of our sponsors tonight, the Glenbard Early Childhood Collaborative, is helping with this program tonight. And Janine Woltman, who is their coordinator, will be doing the introduction in just a moment. Before we get there, I want to quickly tell you about upcoming programs. I'm very proud that the GPS Parent Series understands, again, the value and the importance of the early child and the education in that area. And we're delighted to have this program happening today and also welcoming Dr. Becky Kennedy. She has a book called Good Inside, A Guide to Becoming the Parent You Want to Be. She will be in conversation next Wednesday with Lori Gottlieb, the author of You Should Talk to Someone. So join us next Wednesday at noon or at 7 when we welcome for the first time Dr. Becky Kennedy, again, talking to really the whole lifespan of children. Then the following Wednesday, we're having our first program in person. Dr. Ali Matu will be with us at the College DuPage at noon on September 11th. I hope you can join us. If you have to watch it remotely, that's always going to be available. So either at noon or at 7 p.m., there'll be a remote opportunity, anxiety and stress reduction strategies for teens and adults. So carrying on the same conversation, many of the same strategies will be reinforced. And then the following week, we have our annual community read. This year, we've chosen Michelle Zauner's book, Crying in H Mart, a wonderful story. I recommend it highly. Join us for that discussion on Wednesday, the 18th. In conversation with Michelle Zauner will be Kelly Corrigan. She has a program on PPS called Tell Me More. Chris Heron will be with us in person on Thursday, the 19th at the Mac Art Center. Once again, virtual option will be available. He is a former NBA star. He'll be talking about his experience with the substance misuse and how his NBA career was derailed as a result. And then just want to make mention of all of the programs that we have for early childhood families. So our next one will be welcoming back to GPS Tina Prane Bryson with her new book, The Way of Play. And then in May, we will welcome Dr. Ron Ferguson, The Everyday Principles to Grow Happy, Healthy, and Smart Young Children. And there will be a program in Spanish this year for that early age group. Mariana Pratsky Gutierrez will be speaking on Wednesday, October 2nd, about parenting the child through meltdowns and misbehavior. And I hope you'll let someone know about that program as well. Without further ado, it's time to get started. I just can't wait. Janine Woltman will introduce. She is the Glenbard Early Childhood Collaborative Coordinator and works also with Glenbard parents as teachers. She has a watch party going on, and I can't be more excited about welcome all of those people that are there and you at home too. Take it away, Janine.
Thank you, Gilda. I really appreciate that. We're really excited to be here. We're actually at Queen Bee Early Childhood Center. They let us use a space tonight, so we're really excited about that. But we're mostly excited to hear Dr. Lockhart. Dr. Lockhart is a pediatric psychologist, parent coach, and author. She's a board certified in clinical child and adolescent psychology. She's a highly sought after writer and has spoken nationally at conferences and corporate workshops on topics about ADHD, executive functioning, challenging behavior, and anxiety. She specializes in working with clients who present with medical diagnoses and are seeking alternate solutions. Dr. Lockhart has been interviewed in multiple publications, including the New York Times, the New York Post, and is a freelance writer and contributor for the Gottman Institute. We are delighted to welcome her back to the GPS today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm very happy to be back and to be here. And I will go ahead and share my screen and encourage you all to take notes, and there it is. And any questions that you have, you can type it into the chat, or if you're the watch party, you can ask it live as well, or in the Q&A. So thank you very much. All right. Okay, we can see that okay? I can't see you all anymore, so I'm assuming everything is good. Okay.
We
don't
see you.
the slides. We just see you, Doctor.
Oh, let's try that again. Hold on a second. Let's try that again. There we go.
There we go.
There we go. It's like I've never done this before. All right, there we go. Everything good still? Perfect. Awesome. Okay. So hello and welcome. So we're going to be talking about fear, worry, and anxiety, and what that looks like in little kids. And the thing about anxiety is it is pretty much the same across the lifespan in terms of how it shows up. Just it's slightly different based on developmental age, but the way it's treated is really across the board. We're looking at the same kinds of things in terms of intervention. So we'll talk all about that. So yeah, so most common fears, we'll talk about those. Those are very interesting. There are, if you look it up, I remember when my kids looked at this up on Google one time, all the different phobias, there are hundreds of phobias. So we'll talk about the 10 most common ones, the difference between fear, worry, and anxiety, and then some practical tips and strategies that you yourself might find helpful if you also struggle with anxiety. All right, so let's take a look at the most common fears. These are the 10 most common ones. And feel free, if you're able, to put it in the chat. What are some guesses in terms of what some of these mean? Some of them may stand out to you, and others you may have no clue, or you may be able to figure it out based on the root of the word. So just take your wild guesses. It's always interesting to me to see what people think things are. And then we'll go over them as well too. So any guesses? Let's see. In the chat, fear of spiders. So yes, if you guessed that for arachnophobia, definitely. And Gilda, you're not on mute, just FYI, just so you know. Any other guesses of any of the others? Let me show you a picture to see if any of these trigger any thoughts. Airplanes, okay. All right. Any other guesses based on this? Fear of leaving the home, okay. Social. Shots, yes. Okay, good. You all are on the right track. So let's look at this. So most common fears. We've got arachnophobia, fear of spiders and other arachnids or eight-legged creatures. Ophidiophobia, fear of snakes. Acrophobia, fear of heights. Aerophobia, fear of flying. Cynophobia, fear of dogs. Astrophobia, fear of thunder and lightning. Trypanophobia, fear of injections. One of the biggest reasons why people don't like going to the doctors, by the way. Social phobia, fear of social situations. Agoraphobia, fear of being alone in a situation where escape may be difficult. So it's not just the fear of the crowds. It's like, what if I can't get away? What if I can't escape? Mysophobia, excessive fear of germs and dirt, which can lead to OCD. So these are the most common ones that you might see present in kids, teenagers, adults, all of these things that show up. So given that, there is a difference between the different words that we use. People often use these words in exchange for one another, and they're quite different. So one of the things that I do as a psychologist, I'm in San Antonio, Texas, I see teenagers, adults, And one of the things that I always tell my clients when I hear them use a word a lot in describing themselves and their identity and how they operate in the world is I encourage them to let's look up the word and the definition and the origin of the word, because language is powerful and there's a lot of associations that are made on a very unconscious level when we use language and fuse ourselves with the definition or the meaning, the origin of that word. So when I hear people tell me, oh, I'm just a worrier, I'm a worrywart, everybody in my family worries, I look it up with them. And one of the first times I ever did this, I myself didn't even know where it came from. And worry comes from the German word Würgen, I believe that's how it's pronounced, Wyrgan, which means to choke, to grab by the throat and tear. And when I first read that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's like a violent way to describe something when we're using it as a feeling word. And they often describe it as like a dog worrying a bone, grabbing it and ripping it apart. And when I think about that and how powerful words are, it's like, well, no wonder people start to have problems breathing and can't catch their breath and have panic attacks because you're literally choking yourself with these feelings, this feeling of unease. But it's not just this unease, it's like this paralyzed worry. So be aware of the kinds of words you use to describe things to your kids, to yourselves, the words that they hear you overuse, because they are powerful. Stress is another thing that's very common. We can't avoid stress. There is good stress and there's bad stress. You know, good stress could be getting married, could be learning a new skill, it could be going to Disneyland. Like all of these stresses, it's a lot to do and to plan, but it's a good thing. And then we have bad stresses, a car accident, a storm that destroys your house. Like these kinds of things can be also negative. So it's emotional, physical, psychological tension. Then we have fear, which is an emotional response to a real or perceived imminent threat. It's feeling uneasy. I gave an example earlier that we moved into a new house a year and a half ago, and it's surrounded by a lot of trees and woods and stuff. And one evening, my husband's like, "Come here, quick!" And there was this gigantic centipede in the shower. It was so gross. I've never seen one that large in my life. And so we got rid of it. And ever since then, like I'm so on edge now, understandably, right? Because I'm afraid, first of all, we're like, where did it come from? Did it come from the drain? Did it come from the vent, which terrifies me in of itself? Like, where did it come from? And so now every time I go there, I'm like looking up, I'm scanning, I'm looking down the drain, I'm putting like bars of soap on top of the drain so it doesn't move it. Like it's like it seems like ridiculous, but I'm like so on edge now. And so that fear is like, well, that was a real threat, but there's not like constant threats. We've been here a year and a half and they've been a total of 3 centipedes. That's still more than too many, but it's still like I'm always scanning, like, where is the next one going to come from? Okay. So the fear is real and fear tends to stick with us because, again, we create associations between events, our feelings, and our thoughts. And then lastly, anxiety is the anticipation of future threat. Fear and stress and worry can then morph into anxiety. And when it becomes an anxiety disorder is when it creates dysfunction in some way, abnormality, when you can't go out, interact, do things like you normally do because you're paralyzed by this anxiety. So the types of anxiety disorders in our diagnostic manual range in these areas. Generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, is one of those things that are hard for kids to articulate. It's hard for adults because with GAD, it's this general feeling. It's about in 2 to 4% of kids, but it's this excessive fear, this unease, just not, things just don't feel right. And it affects all aspects of daily living, going to school, going to work, hanging out with friends, going out in public. I just feel uneasy. I just feel uncomfortable and I can't put my finger on it. Separation anxiety disorder is in about 4% of children, and it's this intense fear of being away from parents, caregivers, oftentimes leading to school refusal. This is very common if you have a child going to kindergarten or preschool for the first time and have never, maybe they've been at home or homeschooled or just been at home with you and or with people who are familiar and then having to be separated from you. That's scary. It's very scary. We have social anxiety disorder, which is in about 7% of kids. And it's this extreme fear of social situations or performing. in those situations, and it leads to, again, avoidance and stress, because avoidance feeds fear and anxiety. Then we have the specific phobias that are in about 5 to 10% of kids, like I mentioned earlier. And these, I mean, it could be anything: fear of holes, fear of colors, fear of cats. It could be any kind of fear. And it's this intense, often irrational fear of specific objects or situations. And I think irrational could be used lightly because, it could be said that someone has a phobia of something because they actually experience it, like me with centipedes. So I don't think it's irrational. I think it's perfectly rational. So, but it's the constant scanning that may become irrational. So again, it's all a matter of perspective. And then we have panic disorder, which is less common in less than 1% of kiddos. We see this. But if you came to my presentation in February of this year, I talked about difference between tantrums and meltdowns. And with children, you're not going to see so much a panic disorder, but it really shows up more as meltdowns, because meltdowns are about their nervous system getting overstimulated and over kind of excited about a situation in a very negative way. And so they're falling apart. And so when you see meltdowns, it's probably like a panic type thing with little children. Then we have obsessive compulsive disorder which is in about 1 to 2% of children. And OCD is something that is like persistent unwanted thoughts, which is the obsessions, and then the repetitive behaviors, which is the compulsions. And it's aimed at reducing anxiety. It's like performing a ritual so that I feel better. So if I turn on and off the light switch 5 times, or I wash my hands for this many times, or I put on and off the socks, or it's at a certain texture or whatever, it's just, you'll often hear, I'm going to do this until it's just right. Writing and erasing my letters until it's just right. And so a lot of that is this kind of idea that if I do this, it could be very superstitious behaviors even. If I do this enough times, and something bad won't happen. And then PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, less than 5% of kids, and it's often following a traumatic event with symptoms like flashbacks of an event after a car accident, a storm, a dog bite, avoidance, and hyperarousal. Is that scanning again. So, and doesn't have to be a big T trauma, as is often called in the therapeutic world. And a big T could be like a car accident, or a robbery, or a plane crash. Those are the big T's. Little T's could also be something as, getting a bad experience with you getting an ant bite. And it's because you have a very sensitive kid who has an allergic reaction to something. And now this is something that becomes like this big traumatic situation. So it's all about the perspective of the individual, and big T versus little t can be very subjective. So then what's normal? So we see all the stuff that's abnormal, things that can cause dysfunction and impair how people interact with the world and others. So the thing is that it's very common to feel afraid. Like, it's okay to be afraid. Like, you should be afraid when scary things happen. And the fear is an emotion that helps us to be cautious, so that we're aware of our surroundings and we're not just darting out into traffic, that we're just not doing things that are scary. We should have some level of fear. Fearlessness isn't all good. And then when we don't know what to expect, like a kid going to school for the first time, there's no file or schema for this event, and it's brand new. And when we have experiences, it's like this metaphorical filing cabinet. Every time I do this thing, oh, I know what it's like to go to a new school. I know what it's like to meet a teacher. I know what it's like to make friends. I know what it's like to learn a language. We start to build a filing system of experiences. And the older you get and the more you've lived life, the more files you have. But when you're a little kid, you don't have that filing system. You don't have those files readily available because everything is new. Emotions are new, social interactions are new, relationships are new. So yeah, of course they're going to have anxiety because they don't know what to expect. So when we're like, oh, you'll be fine, and they've never been to school ever, they don't feel like they're going to be fine because it is anxiety provoking. So it's a normal fear. So then we also have fears by age, and these are developmentally appropriate. And when you see babies about 8 to 9 months of age, stranger anxiety is very, very common. Before that, they can go to different people. You're handing your baby around and they're like goo goo gaga, they're all great. And then they get to a point where they're like terrified, looking at you for comfort because they don't want to be around this stranger. Toddlers, 10 months to 2 years, they start to experience separation anxiety from their caregiver, going to daycare, being away from you. Children 4 to 6 start to be afraid of pretend things, things that don't actually exist. Zombies, Dracula, monsters, Loch Ness, any of that stuff. Even if you're a conspiracy theorist, these things are pretend, and kids know that, but well, what if they're not? So those are very common, whether they hear a friend talking about it, they see it in a book or a movie, a cartoon, these things could be, boogeyman under my bed. These are all pretend things that they tend to be afraid of. And then 7 to and plus years old, they start to become afraid of things that can actually happen in real life. Being run over, being kidnapped, parents not picking them up, parents dying, getting sick, something happening to their sibling, things that actually could happen, even if they haven't. And their mind can make up all kinds of stories. And then with preteens and teens, a lot of it is social, being socially excluded, not included in a group text, fear of missing out, not being invited to a party or to a group event. So these are all common fears that occur and can stick with people based on significant events, like being bullied in school, for example. So these are also additional common childhood fears that we often see a lot, that reasons why kids often come to therapy because of things that have actually happened, or what if they could happen, or what if I've seen it on the news, or what if I heard something from a friend that this happened. And all of these things are real events that could actually occur. And so these are also very common childhood fears. And the thing about fears is they don't have to be logical. And what as parents, we often make the mistake of speaking logic into fear-based situations. And we tell our kid, well, you're a big boy. There's no need to be afraid of thunder. Thunder can't even hurt you. Well, that's logical. They might know that, but if they're so riddled with fear, their emotions don't want to hear it. And that's why they often escalate, because they're trying to have you meet them where they're at. So the biggest thing, and we'll talk more about specific interventions, but the biggest thing is to always remember is don't interject, don't introduce logic into a child's fear. You can do that later once they're calm, but initially meet emotion, with calm emotion. So why do we become dysregulated? So the brain dislikes uncertainty, unpredictability, the unknown, and the uncomfortable. Unless you're a big risk taker and you love those things, most of the times our brain dislikes these things. If we cannot figure things out and we cannot understand what will happen next, it feels very dysregulating. And we need to feel safe, secure, and stable to function. And if our basic needs are not being met, higher order needs are going to take a back burner. So food, shelter, water, safety, security, those are basic needs. Going to school, frankly, for kids is not, you don't have to go to school to live. As far as they're concerned, if I feel insecure and I don't feel safe in my environment, or I'm afraid of being separated from you as my caregiver, then all those other things, like, well, you have to learn to read, write, and play with other kids, that's not a basic need. And those are things that are not needed for survival. So a lot of those things then get pushed away because those basic needs don't feel met. The other thing too is our sensory system. We often know about the stuff on the left, things we can hear, smell, taste, touch, feel. And the thing is, we also have a whole different other sensory system as well that feeds us information. So vestibular is our inner ear, has to do with balance. Proprioception is knowing where our limbs are in space. This is helpful for athletes when they're jumping over hurdles, when you're moving through a crowded classroom, that you're not bumping into every desk, knowing where your arms and legs are in relation to yourself and other people. But interoception, when it comes to anxiety, is super important, because interoception is the sense that's telling us also what's going on inside of our body. So when we're hungry, when we're full, when something we've eaten is not agreeing with us, when we feel uncomfortable or uneasy about a person, it's like our gut. And when we feel embarrassed, when we feel isolated, when we feel lonely, when we feel overwhelmed. And again, when you're talking about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10-year-olds, a lot of these experiences and feelings are brand new. I don't understand. My teacher called on me and I said an answer and everybody laughed at me. But what is that? Well, that sounds like embarrassment. Well, what is embarrassment? I've never been embarrassed before. Like these are things that are like, well, duh, of course you were embarrassed. Like that, this is brand new for them. And this interception is telling them, yeah, this is an uncomfortable feeling. So then what do? We want to avoid it. Who wants to feel that way again? I don't want to feel rejected again. I don't want to feel embarrassed again. I don't want to feel lonely again. I don't want to feel scared again. So we tend to run away from it, and our body is reinforcing that. And again, we have to remember the emotions overwhelm logic centers in the brain. So when we are feeling emotions, our brain, our logic, rational brain is not going to be online again at all. Our emotions are going to flood our system and say, nope, we need to avoid this at all costs. Even though logic tells you that's just one person. They're not a good friend either. That teacher was unqualified. That teacher is great. That teacher is just having a bad day. Your mom was just feeling cranky because she was hangry. Like all these things. Well, those are logical explanations, but there could be other things that are going on. Okay. So for anxiety, this is one of the best diagrams I've seen. I really like how this breaks down anxiety because it's showing that when an anxiety provoking event occurs, we're feeling like, okay, this happens. You got bit by a dog. A friend says, I don't want to play with you. Someone says, you make me angry, or you're a disappointment. Anything that feels bad, anxiety provoking, that starts giving you a message about something or feelings about something. So then we avoid because no one wants to experience feeling bad. And so we avoid it. We avoid it psychologically, emotionally, physically, behaviorally. We avoid it at all costs. So it works. The short-term relief is like our brain is like, whew, okay, now I feel better because I've avoided and I don't have to deal with blank. The problem with that, though, is that we have this long-term anxiety growth that occurs over time. Our brain starts to learn, oh, got it. In order to feel better about the situation, I need to not do this thing. I need to not go to school. I need to pretend like I'm not feeling well. I need to have a bad day and get into a fight, whatever it is. I'm learning that in order to feel better, I need to do the avoidance thing. And then what happens over time is the anxiety grows and becomes more and more irrational and harder to address. And what I tell parents and kids and people of all ages is anxiety is one of those diagnoses that you don't want to just let sit. Because if it's not talked about, addressed, therapy, those kinds of things, it gets bigger and worse with time and it becomes more and more irrational. So now you're not just afraid of thunder. You're afraid of like, well, if I get struck with thunder, well, thunder doesn't strike you. No, but that's how I feel. Well, then you get afraid of being sick. And then what if I die alone? What if our house burns down? Like it becomes bigger and more rational and it has no like, this doesn't make any sense. Why are you afraid of all these random things? So it's really important to make sure that it gets addressed. So when the way anxiety shows up is, I always like to look at it and kind of frame it from four different areas. Because if we only address it from just the physical or just the emotional, then we're going to miss the holistic perspective of it. And for many people, it shows up in a primary area and then maybe a secondary area, but it's really important to learn coping skills and education in all areas. One of the biggest ways that anxiety will show up for lots of people is physical signs. And with kids, it's often head, back, and stomach. Headaches, backaches, stomach aches. And it could be sweaty hands, shaking, getting sick often, acne, all kinds of stuff. And physical signs are one of the biggest reasons why kids end up going to the emergency room or going to the doctor or having a lot of sick days. Anxiety will morph into physical symptoms, especially if you're not addressing it. Your mind is fascinating that way. It's like, cool, you're not going to deal with my anxiety. Here's a stomach ache for you. And in over 85% of cases, I believe that's the latest statistic, a lot of gastrointestinal issues that peds gastrointestinal doctors deal with are actually anxiety and have nothing to do with medical concerns. So it's a big thing. It's a big issue, especially with GI issues. Anxiety can also show up as behavioral things that people think are attitude or sass or avoidance or indecision, being indecisive. Procrastination, perfectionism, and anxiety are besties. They hang out like a little group. And because if I feel anxious about something and I think it needs to be perfect, then I'll just procrastinate. Because if I procrastinate, then I can't fail. But the thing is that, well, that's, the joke's on you, because if you don't do something, you fail anyway. But again, the anxiety is like, nope, if I never do it, then I never have to deal with the humiliation of failure. So pay attention to that. Procrastination and perfectionism are actually anxiety in disguise. And then there's emotional signs, which are the ones we often see, like the tearfulness, the refusal to go to school, the kicking and screaming, feeling overwhelmed, agitated. And then the cognitive signs, or the thoughts. So racing thoughts, fogginess, forgetfulness, negative thoughts. I'm a loser. Nobody likes me. Why did you even have me? I'm the worst kid ever. So much of anxiety may show up as like self-deprecating, very negative thinking and thoughts, which then goes in line with anxiety. Anxiety and depression also like to hang out together, and you will see one feeding off the other. So that's all the bad news. But the good news is that anxiety is one of the most studied diagnoses out there, and it is very much treatable and can be treated very successfully. And there's so many different types of interventions that many therapists and coaches and people have experience with that can help with anxiety. And what we know about mental health disorders is that 1 in 5 children have a mental health diagnosis. Typically, the highest ones are ADHD, depression, anxiety, Tourette's, and autism. And anxiety being on one of those top areas, it's treated through a lot of different interventions. So one of the things that is important to understand for yourself, as well as telling your kids and students, is anxiety is a liar. It lies to you. It's a big bully. It takes the truth and distorts it. It chokes you, like the worry. And we cannot believe it because anxiety is a big bully. It tells you all kinds of lies. The other thing is that it's never satiated or satisfied. It's like this big gobbly monster that just grows bigger and bigger the more you feed it. Every time you feed it another lie that you believe is the truth, it gets bigger and bigger and gets more and more unreasonable. So it's really important not to feed the anxiety monster or the worry monster. Our brain's job is also to keep us alive and to keep us safe, which is why we're scanning, which is why I'm scanning every time I go into my bathroom now. So because it gets so good at its job, it's warning us of every possible danger. We don't want to always be scanning because we're not always in danger all the time. But our brain is like, no, no, no. The last time you went in there, or you could have gone there. What if you went in there and it was dark? I don't even want to think about it. All the possibilities of what could have happened. But our brain is trying to say, we don't want a possible situation again. And so it tries to really keep you safe. And that's why you're scanning. That's why you're flashbacking. That's why you're coming up with all these horrible scenarios. Anxiety is also very common and genetic. It tends to run in families. When you meet with a psychologist or a therapist, they'll often ask about family history if you bring in a child with anxiety, because many times other people in the family have it, even if it's not diagnosed. The other thing, too, is that anxiety is also learned. If you're a parent who's suffered and dealt with anxiety, you might have a child with anxiety because they've learned it from you. And, or you may not have realized that you're struggling this much with it until you saw your child struggling with it. So, or your child struggling with it can bring about anxiety in yourself. So it's this kind of feedback loop that it can occur from both sides. But because anxiety can be learned, it can also be unlearned. And that's the really, really good news. It doesn't have to be something that is continually an area where you're suffering with it. So some practical tips. One of the biggest ones is practicing distress tolerance, which means you're basically teaching your kid how to feel the stress, the anxiety, the worry, the flashbacks, and learning to tolerate it. It's just a memory. It's a past experience. It's a thought that popped into your head. Let's sit with that thought and let's create a different thought. And I'll go into more specifics in a moment. But it's basically teaching them how to sit with it, how to tolerate this distress. Another one is to help them sit with the uncomfortable feelings, sit with the uncomfortable emotions, to feel it, and rather than run away from it, melt down over it, avoid at all costs, you're literally sitting with it. Doesn't feel good, but you're sitting with it, helping them to basically habituate to it, It becomes a habit of, I can do tough things. I can feel hard feelings and work through it. It's the opposite of avoidance. You're sitting with it. You're facing it head on. You're also helping them talk through their emotions and making connections between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Well, yeah, of course you don't want to get into the swimming pool. You're having thoughts like, what if something bad happens to me? And you feel scared. But you know what? We know how to do hard things. So we're going to just put our pinky toes in, and then we're going to put our ankles in, and then we're going to put our knees in, and then we're going to just splash around. That's the distress tolerance, learn to sit with it, helping them to make connections. Well, yeah, of course you feel this way because of this. Let's make these connections. So then this is how we work through it. This is how we push through it. Other practical strategies are therapy, of course. That's always a great strategy. For little ones, play therapy is one of the best because play is a child's language. Just like talking is, or sign is how adults work through things. For children, play is their language. And so really good play therapy can involve a lot of really good evidence-based things for anxiety specifically. So just because they're playing, it doesn't mean they're not doing anything. Parent coaching is another really great strategy where you're basically working with a parent coach who teaches you how to help your child with anxiety. And I have found actually parent coaching to be very, very effective. And I've been able to help lots of kids and never see them because their parent is better equipped. Because face it, a lot of us as parents, we didn't get this kind of stuff from our parents. Lots of mental health issues were not addressed. They were thrown under the rug. And it was just, suck it up and drive on. And so learning a lot of those kinds of skills for yourself, then you can be able to teach them to your children, and then you can work through them together. So it's very, very effective, especially because I know it can be very hard to find a therapist in many areas, but it's very easy to find parent coaches because anyone, anywhere in the world can provide that service. Joint parent-child interventions can be very effective. So whether you're meeting with a counselor, a coach, and you and the child together work through this with a therapist or coach. Social skills groups are also very effective, where other children in the same age group dealing with anxiety can work through role playing, work through how they feel, different scenarios. A lot of cognitive behavioral therapy type stuff and exposure therapy can be very effective. And this can be done with school psychologists, school counselors at the school setting. And then emotional intelligence, building up their feeling vocabulary, helping them identify how I feel and what I'm doing with those feelings and what can I do differently. So these are all really practical and very effective for your kid. Also, teaching them, starting with education. Over and over, the research says that no matter where people are at on the spectrum of anxiety or willingness to change, educating them on the stuff that's going on is very, very, very effective because you're telling them like anxiety lies to you, that it's learned so it can be unlearned, that it's never satisfied. We don't want to feed the anxiety monster. All of that education is very effective in helping to combat that. Deep, relaxed diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing is a really great YouTube video from Elmo, and it also includes rap and pop music called Belly Breathe. And it's a really short video, and it's musical, and it's Elmo singing and rapping. And so it really helps teach kids how to belly breathe. And so really teaching them how to do that really helps with physical anxiety. Progressive muscle relaxation is another great one for physical anxiety because you're basically tensing up. So in that muscle group, so if they're grinding their teeth or they have tension in their headache or in their fists, so they're tightening up, breathe in, and then you release it while exhaling, and you keep repeating that and go to different muscle groups. Visual and sensory imagery is one of my favorite ones, and that's using all the different senses. Thinking about your safe space. When mommy drops you off, when daddy drops you off to daycare or to school, let's think about this, a fun place, a safe space. What would that look like? What would you see? What colors would you notice? Who would be there? What would you hear? Favorite music? What would you smell? What would you be drinking? What would you be feeling? What kind of temperature? And you have all this kind of, so they can have this imagery in their mind. You can do this for kids who have a hard time going to sleep at night because they're afraid. Having this visual and sensory imagery experience so that they can create their whole world in that. And then challenging negative thoughts. If you're going to have negative thoughts about this and look at the doom and gloom, then let's also think about what could go right. So you're like, what if I go to school and nobody likes me? Yeah, and then what if you go to school and you make tons of friends? So if you're gonna, let's be fair and have a balanced view of what can happen. And we're not negating what they're feeling. Again, we're joining them in what they're thinking, but you're also allowing them to challenge it and think of different ways of addressing it. Side note too, not all of these are going to work with every kid, but these are a variety of strategies that are shown to be very effective. And then also managing and reducing stress and the lifestyle that you're living in terms of being overly busy. If you're running ragged from one thing to the next, and there's club, and then there's sports for the school, and there's music lessons, and there's just constant stuff, and then they're not going to bed till late, and then waking up early. Yeah, lack of sleep is going to lead to more anxiety. Sleep is restorative, and if kids aren't getting enough of it, they're going to feel they're like they're missing out on it. Activity, physical activity and exercise is a good one. Again, not too much because you want to keep a balanced life, but exercise is a really good one for anxiety, and then doing things that are fun and social as well, having some downtime. So coaching your child through anxiety is involving telling them you're not alone. Lots of kids struggle with this, even if you can't see it. Explain to them how anxiety works. You get anxious and then you want to avoid it, and that makes sense. And then you feel better, but you know what happens over time? It gets bigger. So you're just explaining it to them to help them understand why we fight anxiety. And then guide them in changing their thoughts, challenging their behaviors, and then creating a lifestyle where you invite them to beat anxiety on a daily basis. Maybe today is not the day that we do it because I just feel spent. And maybe today is a day that we're going to do a little bit more of this, and we're going to challenge ourselves because we can do hard things. And then in the moment for an anxious or dysregulated child, always start with listening to see what is really going on. You're reflecting back to make sure you're hearing or seeing what they're giving to you. You're checking in. You're empathizing with the feelings. You're validating. Of course you feel that way. It's your first day of school. Of course it's okay. Of course you feel scared. You offer a joint solution. What can, daddy and you do together so that we can get ready for school? And then you offer sort of a reassuring statement. I'm here for you. Your teacher will help you get out of the car and walk you to class, but you don't engage in excessive reassurance. Because what often happens is that people get the mess that your kid gets the message. Well, there must be something to be afraid of because they're really spending a lot of time reassuring me. So I must be a reason to be scared. So empathy is key. Always respond with empathy. Always respond with the feelings first. Don't go to logic first, because that's going to create a situation where they have to fight you to prove to you how miserable they are. So I want to list these, and you can take a screenshot or a picture of this if you like. But these are all different things. Again, sometimes one thing will work one day and for a couple of weeks, and then they crash and burn another week. So a big thing that works a lot for children is anything that involves symbolism or metaphors. They work really well for kids. So if they have a story that they're sharing or telling themselves, you can use the first three. Okay, now you've told me what you think could happen. Let's change the channel or the story or the ending so they can literally draw it out, talk it out, and allowing them to know that these emotions will shift. It's also important to identify the real emotion. Are they not doing their homework or their assignment? Not because they're lazy. Please don't use that word with our kids, but maybe it's because they're afraid of failure. Maybe it's because they don't have the skills they need. Maybe they feel they don't feel confident. So always look through that and then practice these situations in the imagination, and then do it through role playing. If you're a teacher, you could do it in your classroom. Have the students practice different scenarios. Well, what if we get stuck on a problem? Or what if someone doesn't want to play with you on the playground? And then practice these scenarios so they can feel like they can master it. It's another one you can take a picture of or a screenshot of. And a lot of the research talks about when kids are having challenges that show anxiety challenges, but they show up as behavioral problems, that many times what they're lacking is problem solving skills. So we want to teach them problem solving skills so they can identify what the problem is, find solutions that are good and bad, and then try them out. And if they don't work, you revisit it and start over again. And these are all different ways that you can really help them to find that most problems have solutions and we can work them out together. These are some others. These work better for the older kids, or if you have a kiddo who's very verbal and really savvy and kind of on it, then some of these things can be very helpful for them as well, because you're helping them. It's more cognitive, addressing the more cognitive side of anxiety. I don't see that as much with the little kids, but for a lot of them who are very verbal and are overthinkers, sometimes you can have some very philosophical and deep questions, and this can be a really great one to look at with them, for them. So remember, avoidance feeds anxiety, and avoidance of the discomfort of anxiety is the reason. And avoidance always prolongs anxiety. Don't allow your kid to avoid things, because it will make it worse. So some helpful scripts: if they feel afraid, you can say, of course you're scared. It's okay to feel scared when things are new or scary. Again, you're addressing and speaking to the emotion. They feel uncomfortable. You feel uncomfortable. That makes sense. It's okay to feel uncomfortable when things are so uncertain. And again, use this in your voice. Don't use it as exact script. Or think it's unfair. I'm going to preschool and my little sister gets to stay home. You don't want to say, well, she's 8 months old. She's not ready for school. That's logic. Oh, I know it feels unfair. That's hard to feel that way. Then once the calm happens, then you can explain, well, she's 8 months old. She's not going to be in preschool. So always start with the emotion first. And then also making sure that you seek professional help and support if you feel like you're at your wit's end, you feel like you're messing things up, that you're overreacting to your kids' anxiety, you feel like they're triggering your anxiety. Just if you feel like this is not the child that I remember having, there's something not quite right, you should make sure that you seek that out, because you don't want it to keep going and then allow it to get worse over time and to grow. So if you do feel like you need additional resources, my team and I here at New Day Pediatric Psychology, we do offer parent coaching for people around the world, and for of all ages. I've seen people with kids as young as 2 all the way up through college age. So you can find me at anewdaysa.com, or at Instagram at Dr. Ann-Louise Lockhart, or Facebook at A New Day Pediatric Psychology. And you can reach out for further support, consultation, onesies, or over time. I've seen people for one-time sessions or years. So those are all options for you. And then I have books available as well too. As a quick side note, a lot of times kids who present as anxious actually have ADHD, and a lot of ADHD can be disguised as anxiety and vice versa. And so that's something to really pay attention to, because it's so easy to miss. And I've seen a lot of adults who were diagnosed with anxiety who actually had ADHD. So we don't want to over pathologize, but it's just something to keep in mind, that I've noticed that it's something that often goes missed because of that. All right. So let's open it up to questions and any discussion. Let me stop my screen.
Yes, please, let's open it up. I'm going to tell you my takeaway. Okay.
Okay, go for it.
I love when you said the brain's. Okay, so we know you talked about how the brain's job is to keep us safe. And then you remind us that feeling uneasy, this is normal. But sometimes the brain gets too good at its job. I love that when talking with children. And then anxiety lies to us, distorting the truth. They certainly understand that. And then help them build their stress tolerance to get acquainted with the stressful situation. We're going to help them with a vocabulary, and then we're going to give them permission to talk about those feelings, and then to sit with them and with the uncomfortable until it passes. And then only then can we be logical. We're going to be available to talk, open-ended questions. We're going to validate, and we're going to listen calmly. We're going to remind them it's okay to feel that way. We're going to help them problem solve. We're not going to jump in and solve the problems. We're going to teach them, going through your suggestions. We're going to use calm breathing to help them relax their brain and their body and their mind. We're going to help them change the story. How did I do?
You did beautifully. A+.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So you made me think about when when you were talking, and we're going to talk for a minute because I have a question about that ADHD myself, but about not minding for misery when they walk in the door at the end of the day. What does that mean to you?
Wait, say that again. Not what?
Don't mind for misery. When I think about that, I think about how when we feel that our children are hurting, it's that solving, that to me is the crux of the challenge, that you want to make it better, you want to help, you want to solve. That's where we get into avoidance, right? And we're
Yes.
really not. But this, I think sometimes we have a tendency to say, so that child, so was it really hard at lunch again when you were afraid because it's a little dark in there, mining for misery?
Yeah, and
Do
I
you like
think,
that?
yes, I do, because when we jump in to rescue or to fix quickly, what we're telling our kid is that I don't believe that you have the resources and the ability to figure it out with me by your side. We're not going to just throw them to the wolves and expect that they can figure it out at 5 or 10, but we also don't
Right.
want to destroy their ability to know that I can solve my problems with my
Mm,
parent. I can figure things out. I can use my words. I can express how I feel about these things, and we don't want to give them the message that, nope, you're not capable of this, so I'll just swoop in and fix it. And it's really hard not to do that when you see your kid suffering, but it's really important that you do it alongside them. You do it alongside
yeah.
them.
Yeah, that I think is so key. And I know
Mhm.
I've heard it said that for older children, when it becomes our solution, then we're really denying them the success of overcoming that because it's our success because we came up with a problem. And
Right.
so can you talk for a little bit about ADHD, please?
Yeah. So
I
the
know
reason
we
why
haven't gone there.
Yes, the ADHD, why it looks so much like anxiety is because a lot of the features overlap. And ADHD, the way I conceptualize it, is a rule out diagnosis because it looks like so many things. So the hyper focusing, the inattention, the hypervigilance, the distraction, that's very key to anxiety. That's ADHD too. They're like off in their own world, they're in their own mind. Sometimes also people might miss the hyperactivity, impulsivity part of ADHD. They're like, oh, my kid isn't hyperactive or impulsive. They're just sitting there. But maybe they're hyperactive in their mind. Maybe their mind is racing,
Mm,
which makes it difficult for them to fall asleep. So maybe they're not physically hyperactive, but mentally, I've spoken to a lot of girls especially that they don't look on the
interesting.
outside as a hyperactive kid, but
That's
man, do they have a hard time falling asleep at night because their mind is racing of all the scenarios that went wrong that day. So,
that's
so those are the
interesting.
things that we have to be aware of. Is it's so easy to miss, and many times it's actually not anxiety, it's actually ADHD. And then, or sometimes once you deal with the anxiety, you realize, oh, snap, it's really ADHD stuff going on here too, in addition to the anxiety. So those I'm seeing more and more of that.
Interesting. We last year and again this year we're hosting Bruce Perry in his important book, What Happened to You, sort of a
Mhm.
shift from what's wrong with you. And he
Yes,
talks about how with that big T, that big trauma, you can't possibly access the part of your brain that 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 needs to be. The child may look like they're paying attention and learning, but it's just impossible, isn't it?
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when you're dealing with a lot of trauma or events, divorce, domestic violence, homelessness, substance abuse in the family, all these different things, those affect a child's growing brain. And so it makes them more susceptible to a lot of these mental health diagnoses. So yeah, a lot of that stuff can happen, and it creates an environment for them to be on guard or to be parentified in some situations because they're dealing with all this stuff. So it's important to keep that in mind and not jump to a diagnosis or look for one. But really, to me, it's about finding the solutions and giving them the skills they need so they can cope, regardless of what the diagnosis is.
Right, right. Um,
I
you
see a
talked.
question here too, Gilda.
Oh, wonderful. Let's take that.
Yeah. From Janine. I think it's from the watch
Janine,
party,
okay,
right?
Janine, wondering a couple of things a parent caregiver might do to help themselves support the child sit with the discomfort, which is so hard for a parent. That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to give you an example from a movie that I saw called A Simple Favor with Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively. So this is it was a really great scene in the movie. One of the characters, a parent had gone missing, passed away, and the child had gotten into a fight with another child. So the mom of the second child that got into a fight with this other child, she said to the child, she's like, what you did wasn't right. You shouldn't have hit the child. And he's like, I'm really angry. And she's like, yes, I'm angry too. So we'll just both sit here in this grass and be angry together. And I'm like, it was such a simple act, but it was so brilliantly done because she just sat there. She just sat there with this kid who just hit her child. He was angry and she was angry too, and they just both sat there being angry together. And that's sitting in discomfort. That's what happens when you go to a wake, someone at the funeral, and you're seeing all this emotion and distress, and then the mood starts to shift as you're sitting there, and people are crying, and you're just sitting there. That's the sitting with the discomfort. That's not rushing through it, not rescuing them, not saying, oh, don't feel sad. No, you're literally sitting with the discomfort. And yes, it is really hard to do because you want to soak it up. You want to help them feel better. You want to make all the pain go away. But sitting in that discomfort is really hard, and it is really hard to do, but it's really important because you're communicating to them that your feelings are not too big for me to handle. And I'm not going to run away when things get hard. So you don't need to either. And so that's what you're communicating with them, that we're both going to just sit here and just sit with the discomfort because it's important to not avoid. And you're helping them habituate to the fact that, oh, I can sit with this and I won't die. Like it's not the end of the world. I can actually get through this. So yeah, I agree. It is hard, but it's a very important skill. And why it's hard for many adults is because we never got it. So we didn't get to practice it. We're literally
Right.
practicing it as we're parents with our kid. So that's why it's hard for you too. So we're breaking
Right.
cycles by doing this.
Right. Wondering if there's some tips on helping kids to name some of those signals that they're feeling. Yeah, and then
You can,
yes, the slides available after. Thanks to Dr. Lockhart's generosity, this video will be available on the GPS YouTube channel. So in that way, you can take advantage of the slides. Make sense?
yes, yes.
Okay.
So there's so many resources out there. Big Little Feelings, there's lots of stuff on Instagram, people, wholehearted school counseling on Instagram, but anything with emotion cards, emotion books, learning resources has an emotion book. So many different, anything with emotions that have a variety of emotions, the words, the face of what it looks like, and teaching them about these
Mhm.
things. I had a kid one time when I did play therapy years ago. He wanted to play Candyland, but wanted to do it with a twist. And so every color, there was a different emotion for it. And every time we landed on that color, we had to talk about a time when we felt that emotion. Brilliant. And so there's so many ways you can do that and creating those, again, connections. Oh, yeah, I remember a time when I got real angry when someone cut me off in traffic. What about you? Oh, I remember a time when nobody would play with me on the playground and they say, you're not my friend, and really talking about those things. And so it could be really kind of everyday type of thing. It can be done in just regular conversations, having them hear you talking through how you dealt with emotions in your workday, and just making it very organic and very kind of easy rather than like, well, tell me, what about your feelings? What feelings did you have today? That's going to shut them down and they're not going to understand what that looks like. So I'm saying use a lot of those tools for kids about books, cards, all that stuff that deals with that.
I have a question. So from where you started and to where you are today, what has been surprising or what's sort of unexpected to what you're seeing today? What's different? What's something you didn't imagine you would be feeling after all these years of being in practice?
That's a great question. I think when I first started, so I got licensed in 2006, which is amazing. And it's crazy how long that's been. Um, I remember I worked with the military, kids and service members, and working with anxiety and oppositional behaviors and depression was so easy. It was so easy. You could do these therapeutic strategies, these evidence-based strategies, and within 4 to 8 weeks, which is what is the timeline, they were better, kind of healed, in remission, all those different kinds of things. Now it is so much harder. And I feel like it's this unremitting anxiety and depression and OCD and trauma. Like a lot of problems are hanging on to our kids. It's so much harder.
Mhm.
And I think so much of the influence in our society, the messages that they're getting, how fast paced things are, it's just so much harder. And I think that's what I've noticed the most. And the Surgeon General put out this document, I think it was last year, on the epidemic of loneliness and how 50% of adults in America are lonely. And I think that a lot of that has impacted, and not just since the pandemic, this has been going on for decades. And I believe a lot of the mental health concerns of adults are affecting their children. And so I'm seeing a lot of that we're more connected, but less. And I feel like that's the same thing with kids. I don't feel like kids are playing as much as they used to. I feel like they've lost a lot of their joy and their impulsivity and their play. A lot of times kids come to play therapy and they don't know how to play with cards and different things because they're on their tablets. So I feel like a lot of things have been lost in terms of childhood. Kids are being exposed too early to things that are way more mature than they should be able to handle. And I feel like that's affecting them. So yeah.
So you talked a lot about the importance of the relationship. Close us out with some one or two things that we need to do to really build that relationship with our children, to
Yeah,
strengthen that relationship.
I think time spent with them, and I know parents, and again, this had just came out with the Surgeon General's office about parents are spending more time with their kids and they're just feeling burnt out. But I think it's not about tons of time, especially because we're balancing so much. It's about really good quality time, really hearing your children and connecting with them in meaningful ways. Cooking dinner, eating a meal, making sure that you have at least one meal together if you can as a family. I think those are really important. And the other thing is not to don't focus so much on rescuing your kids from their distress, but being with them in it. And I think that's an important skill because it's a skill that we need to have as well. And I want to say as well too, before we close out, someone put that a lot of these things sound like occupational therapy. And yes, a lot of these things are very OT based. So even if you can't find a mental health therapist, an occupational therapist would also be a good alternative as well, because a lot of that is they practice teaching kids about sensory stuff and emotional regulation. So they're a really, really great resource as well too. So, but yeah, I would say don't be so hard on yourself as a parent. Know that it's hard because it is, and you're doing the best that you can, and so is so is your child.
Beautiful. What a treat to have spent this time with you today, Dr. Lockhart. A pleasure. Thank you to the families that are with you, Janine, at the watch party, and the families at home. This is where we go hug the kids, Dr. Lockhart. So that's what we'll go do. Thank you. Come back next week and be with us when we welcome Dr. Becky Kennedy. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Close this out.
I'm sure I'm not the only one who's taken 10 pages of notes here. Thank you so much. Here, let me just, just quickly, your takeaway. This is not logical. This is not logical. If we that's a big takeaway for me. Letting them know that they're not their thoughts. That this anxiety is distorting the truth, and of course, all of these reminders about reflecting what you've heard, the empathy of coming up with joint solutions. So much good here. So, what would you say is in terms of a script before we get to the questions that are loaded up here? I love your script so far. What do you think is a script that you get asked for most often? In other words, a really common problem, and help us with the verbiage.
Honestly, when I work with parents who have anxious kids, they often ask about scripts for themselves because they find that their child's anxiety is triggering for their anxiety, or it's very unsettling for their entire nervous system. And they find themselves overreacting or getting extremely frustrated. So a lot of times parents are like, okay, what should I say to myself in those moments? Because I lose it, or I feel like I'm on the verge of losing it. And a big thing that I say to them is saying things like, this is normal. This is developmentally appropriate. This is common. My child will get through this. I'm able to help them through this, and provide a lot of self-regulation for yourself by breathing, taking a walk, going for taking a break, tag teaming with your partner and checking out for a little bit, coming back, whatever you need to do, and expressing that to your child. Looks like we both are in a situation where we can't resolve this. We're going to both take a break and come back in 10 minutes. Let's set a timer. But I think a lot of that is a big part because anxious kids tend to be very triggering for adults and their parents.
I thought you were going to say, and anxious children generally have anxious parents. That's what
They can. They can.
Mhm.
I think it's often opposite. Anxious parents will often have anxious kids.
Absolutely. Yes. That's
Yeah.
what I meant to say. Thank you. Another script about, I know you stress, as so many others do, about giving them the vocabulary to what they're feeling. What's script so I can talk to my child about having them get in tuned with what exactly? Are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you sick? You know, to help us with a script for that.
Yeah. So, really is so dependent on the situation, but I think it's like, I remember a situation years ago with my son when he was 5 or 6, and he was just acting in what looked like very obnoxious behavior. He was just pushing everybody's buttons, just being really, really obnoxious on the surface. Okay. And my thought was, okay, what is going on? Is this normal behavior or what's happening? And so what I asked him was like, rather than saying, why are you being so obnoxious? Like, I'm noticing that you're making fun of your sister, that you're getting in your dad's face. Are you feeling hungry? No. Are you feeling tired? Maybe. Do you feel like maybe you need a snack and snuggle with mom? Would you like to spend some time with mommy? Yes. So you're basically helping them. That's where that you're making the connections. Like, I'm seeing this, trying to stay from judgment and punishment in those situations, and being curious about what's driving the behavior. I'm seeing this on the surface. What could be driving this behavior? And so then what happened was he kind of snuggled next to me, and within like 2 minutes, he was fast asleep and slept for a long time. So when he woke up, I was like, it seems like when you were doing all those things before, that you were really tired and you just wanted to cuddle with mom and get a nap. He's like, ooh, when I'm not napping. When I don't nap, I'm getting like, I really have a bad attitude. It's like, well, because your body was telling you that you needed sleep. So we need to listen to when our body's telling us things. But sometimes they don't know. And that's why we're teaching them. We're teaching them to make a connection. Sometimes if you're feeling this way, maybe your body is telling you something. What is your body telling you that you need? Just like when we get hot or thirsty, our body's telling us that we need to cool down or need water. So what is your body telling you? What's going on? What is the feeling telling you that you need? And I think we have to be curious and look behind the behavior and identify that. And that's super hard because everything is new when they're preschool age. Everything is new when they're really young. It's all new territory. And so we have to remember that, okay, this is new for them. They don't know this. They've never done this before. They've never felt this feeling before.
Here is another question about asking actually from the script about how to help a student a 4-year-old who now is experiencing separation anxiety. The teacher would like some suggestions.
Yes, definitely from a teacher's perspective. I would say working with parent and teacher together, talking about what is behind the separation anxiety, like what is the real fear? What is the child afraid of? Are they afraid because there's someone picking them on in the class? Are they afraid of the teacher? Are they afraid of, is there something in the classroom that scares them? Where I used to be, it was a picture my mom had when I was a real little kid that I was afraid of going to a certain part of her bedroom because I thought she had a picture of a monster. It was an orchid. And she's like, why would I have a monster in my bedroom? Like, so, I mean, you never know. There could be a picture that you have in your bedroom that scares them. Could be a smell, could be a sound. So I would say become a detective and get to the root of what is driving that separation anxiety. Are they afraid the parent's not going to pick them up? Are they trying to stay home because their little sibling gets to stay home? Are they afraid of because their parent is really sick and they're afraid they're going to get sicker if they're not around because they're the caretaker? I mean, there's so many different reasons. And so I would say get curious about the origins of the separation anxiety and meeting that need so that the child can be reassured of that and talk through those solutions. So always get curious.
Be curious. Can ACEs cause anxiety later in life, like early childhood abuse or witnessing DV can cause anxiety in adolescence? And can abuse cause OCD? So those two are together.
Yes, absolutely. So adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, has been shown there's about 10 that are categorized. And if you have 4 or more, you are more likely to have a mental health diagnosis, including anxiety, depression, all kinds of stuff. And a quality of life tends to go down with more ACEs that you have. So yes, all of those things can occur. But the good news is that ACEs can be treated. Therapy, coaching, self-help, all of those things, exercise, good nutrition, all that stuff can be mediated with the anxiety and all that kind of stuff. So yes, abuse, trauma, all that stuff can lead to mental health issues, including anxiety, OCD, all that kind of stuff, depending on the nature of the trauma or the experience. But that's the bad news. The good news is that it is very much treatable. And just like trauma can occur, healing can occur in the brain too.
Beautiful. Can you talk for a minute about social media and young children technology?
Yes, they should not be on it, period. So the social media should not, I mean, kids should not be on it at least until age 13. And there is a movement of people saying not till 8th grade, so about age 14, 15. So social media is not for little kids. Their brain is not equipped to handle it. They should definitely not be on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, Facebook, Snapchat. Social media is not for them. So it's not even a matter of minimizing. It's about they should not even be on it.
How can I tell the parents I work with to stop giving them tablets?
Oh my gosh, good luck with that one. I mean, tablets is they're a good babysitter, that's for sure. But the American Academy of Pediatrics says that little kids should, well, 2 to 18-year-olds should not be on screens more than 2 hours a day. Now that is hard for a lot of people because 2 hours is not a lot of time. But kids who are little, they are so influenced by so much. And they can get, because screens, YouTube, all that stuff gives dopamine hits constantly. Dopamine is the pleasure center of our brain and makes us like things. So whenever we get a like, whenever we get flowers, money, win the lottery, that gives us a hit that we like in our brain. And so those things do that. And so it's really important for kids not to get their dopamine hits from tablets and social media. They need to get it from other things like old school games, playing card games, playing outside, exercise, sports, play dates, reading, cooking with you, doing activities with you. They need to get their hits through other things, because if they know that their dopamine cup can be filled with screens, they're not going to want to do anything else. So I would really encourage you to talk to parents about really eliminating or minimizing how much screen time, and to really engage their kids in doing other activities, and then giving them a list of activities, finding things that are creative and unique that don't require a lot of time, money, and energy, but are little ways that they can interject those fun interactive times.
Can you
An
talk a little
alpha.
bit about
Go ahead.
sleep? Sleep.
Sleep and anxiety. Well, that's very common for kids who are very anxious, or lack of sleep can lead to anxiety. Sleep is restorative for all ages, but especially for growing kids. And so when they don't get enough sleep, that's for their developmental age, you're going to see more anxiety because their body is not getting restored at night. So that's why I was talking about not having too many activities and getting overly packed with your schedule. So really making sure that they get to bed at a certain time, and making sure they get the hours that they need every night.
Quick question about a child just not compliant about taking a shower, brushing their teeth, that kind of thing. Young child.
So I would say many times for things like that, those things aren't fun for kids, and they don't want to do it because it feels like it'll take forever and it doesn't feel enjoyable to them. And so I would really say to make it fun and enjoyable. Do something that make it a game, do it alongside them, play music, make it a dance party, finding ways of connection. Many times kids don't want to do bedtime or to wind down from something that's fun, or brushing their teeth, because those things aren't fun. And so make it engaging for them until you don't have to do it as much. because you have to front load a lot of that engaging and that connection to make it more pleasant for them.
This is let's finish up this last question because we know it is on so
Okay.
many people's minds. You know, you talked about last night's program on how to raise a healthy gamer, talking about the dopamine, and there's so many parts of the brain that are influenced by gaming and social media. And then the connection, the question is sort of about what's the connection with depression, uh, and excessive use.
So a lot of what the research talks about is excessive use on platforms is because of a lot of the comparison and envy and like fear of missing out. And kids are seeing, oh, he has the newest toy, or look how much money he makes, or that's so fun, or she's so pretty, and all of these things that are happening. And that will breed a lot of comparison, a lot of envy, a lot of depression, a lot of body image issues. And that's why it's so harmful, because they're getting exposed to things, even if they're looking at something that's basic, like a dog training video, but they're looking at the girl who's doing the dog training and like, oh, I wish I was pretty like her, or I wish I had friends like him. And so that's where a lot of that is happening. There's a lot of that comparison.
And last night they were talking about how that the ease of being online, as compared to social interactions in the real world, you're just going to be more comfortable there, and then sort of like a revolving doors that you're going to go there more often, and then as you just mentioned, missing out on all those other things like play and you know of interactions with others and problem solving with others. It's a big issue that everybody's talking about. You brought us so much information about this and everything anxiety. I so always enjoy listening to you, and so many people
Thank
have
you.
stuck with us. And we'll be back at 7 o'clock tonight. So tell a friend and come back. Thank you, everybody. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Dr.
everyone.
Locke.
Bye.
Wonderful to talk to you. Take care.